So this project's been on the back burner for a good while now. I picked up a couple of these lengths of railway track at an auction about a year or so back, and they've just been sitting here in my garden ever since. First thing I did was to clean down, take off any loose rust or some bits of cement that were stuck onto the rail track. Then I measured out the length I wanted and marked it off. I marked off the length I wanted, and then I started to cut with a 4-inch cutting disc. I wanted this project to be a minimal tool project and to see if I could do the whole thing with a small angle grinder. Now, I did this for a couple of reasons. First of all, my big angle grinder is broken and I don't have another one. And second of all, just to see if it was possible to do with a small angle grinder like this. So having marked out the top line, I proceed to cut down both sides and then flip it over and score along the bottom. I cut as close as I could to the full way through, but when there was only a little bit left, I decided to try and snap it off. This metal can be quite brittle, and if you manage to bend it, it will break quite easy. As you can see, there is only a small amount left. I took it into the workshop, and the first thing I did was to check to see how the surface was on the top. It's very rusted and very pitted. As you can see, this is an old piece of track and it's not in good condition, but we'll see what we can get out of it. I marked the length I wanted to make the beak and found the point and drew back with a marker to outline where I was going to cut. Now, cutting this beak is going to be the majority of the work of this anvil. It's not easy to cut with a small grinder like this, and if you do have the option to use a bigger grinder or cut it with an oxyacetylene torch, I'd recommend doing it. Working on a large piece of metal like this with a small angle grinder, you have to make sure that you don't burn out the motor in your grinder. Tools like this have a duty cycle, and it's how much time they can run per hour without burning out the motor. I'm not too sure what it is for this one, so I kept my cutting down to a minimum of about 20 minutes. These deep cuts into heavy metal like this sandwich the blade a lot, so the motor would begin to heat up. So I made sure that when I was doing this project, I had a couple of things on the go. So I'd cut for 15-20 minutes, put it down, go do something else, let the grinder cool down. This way I made sure I didn't burn out the motor in the grinder. If you're working with cheaper grinders, I'd leave it at even less time, maybe 10 minutes, and then wait for the grinder to cool down. As you can see, it's taken a while to cut through this. I'm about 2/3 the way through on the right hand side. Now as I get closer to the bottom and there's only a little bit left, I decide to lever it and see if I can snap it off. This works out quite well, but be careful, metal's hot. On this side I decide to take a hammer and chisel out because there's a little more left, and I knock it off, remembering not to burn my fingers this time. I start a relief cut underneath the bead to start cutting out the section that I was going to remove. And then I change over to a grinding disc and I start the process of grinding the top. As you can see here, there's some very deep pitted rusting on top of this. and I work my way across, cutting it down as deep as it needs to go to remove all of these. And then flip it over to the side and start dressing up the side surfaces and grinding down the area that I snapped off. Once I got the first round of dressing done on the top surface, I colour it all in with marker and then go over with the belt sander. This shows me where all the high points are and shows me what parts need to be taken down. I do this a number of times, and this is the first process of trying to develop a really flat surface on top. Now this is never going to be perfect, but I want to get it as close as I possibly can. At this point I'm trying to get the surface as flat as possible, so I'm using a straight edge to show me where the high points are, marking them and grinding them down. I'm also dressing up the beak a bit more and getting a bit of a radius on the edge of it. As you can see here, there's a lot of high spots. Now the reflection of the surface makes them look a lot bigger than they actually were. By rocking my straight edge over and back, I can find a high point, I mark it, and then I work on grinding that down. I keep repeating this procedure until I'm satisfied with the straightness of the surface. I'm not going to be able to get a sharp corner along the edges without having to cut away quite a lot at the top, but I do want to have a sharp angle for different parts of working. So I decide to cut about 100mm in from the bottom on each side to give myself a nice 90-degree angle that I can shape and work with. I'm working at taking the worst of the rust off the side of the anvil. There's some heavy flaking rust. I'm not trying to clean it down perfectly, I just want to get the worst of it off for the minute. I'll address this in a future project. I then work on taking out that piece under the beak. I cut it in fairly far and then I break off the last bit because I want to have a nice little curved radius. I don't want to finish in a point. I dress this up and then I start taking down the taking off the sharp edges. I take my disc sander and just give a quick dressing across the top to see how it is, and then decide to check how the anvil sounds. The anvil sounds pretty good, but on the end where I cut the sides off you can see it's a little duller and it doesn't have quite the rebound. I'm not quite sure why that is. I move on to a flap disc to take off all the edges and to try and smooth the surface out. This is really good at just blending all the edges and taking out the gouges from the grinding disc. I smooth off the edges and then I drill 4 holes so that I can anchor it down to a log. I start with a pilot drill, making sure to use plenty of cutting oil to help me get through without burning out my bits, and then move on to a 10mm bit so I can hold these down with coach screws afterwards. And here we are, the finished anvil. As you can see, the edges are a little rough, but I've got a nice sharp edge to work off of, and I think this will accomplish just about everything I wanted to. The main top surface is beautifully flat, so for now, pretty happy with the project. I hope you've enjoyed this. Tune in for more videos and when you see this in use.